Hey everybody, welcome to Science with Mr. Z. We are in Unit 4 Genetics today. We're going to talk about traits. Yesterday we talked about DNA and nucleotides, and now we're going to start talking about how it is that those nucleotides end up making us and giving us all of the wonderful characteristics that we have. So we're going to talk about traits today, and we're going to do an activity at the end of this to look at some of the traits that we have and we might share with some of our classmates. So to start off with, we're going to start a new page in our notebook today. The title can just be traits, and we're going to write the learning intention today of what are traits and how do they relate to DNA and the environment. We're going to look at different traits that people might have, and we're also going to see what role the environment plays and how those traits are displayed in us. Okay, if you need to, you can pause the video right now, take some time to make sure you get that learning intention down. When you're ready, you can move on, but I'm going to keep talking. Okay, so first off, we have a quick write here, as per usual. And what I want you to think about today is why is it that we look like our parents? Maybe you've heard somebody say that you have your grandmother's eyes or your grandfather's sense of humor. Maybe someone has said to you, you sound just like your brother or your sister. Or maybe you've said that to somebody else. What is it? Why do you think that this is true? That's what I want you to reflect on. And you can pause it again here and write something down. I'm going to be looking just for a few sentences what your first thoughts are on this topic. So go ahead, pause the video now, and when you're done writing, you can come back. Okay, so hopefully you took some time to do that. We are now going to write down the operational definition of traits that I'm going to give you here. And what I'm going to tell you is that a trait is any notable feature or quality in an organism. For example, we all have different combinations of traits, and that's what makes us unique. An example of a trait that maybe I have is sort of wavy hair, brown hair. I have greenish blue eyes. These are all traits. They're notable features about me. Now, going beyond that, traits aren't always observable just by eye. There are all sorts of different types of traits that we might have. And we're going to take a look at some different types of traits and categories of traits in this next slide here. One type of trait might be a behavior trait. Classic example of a behavior trait is the way dogs love to chase after balls and play fetch. This is just a behavioral trait that is an inborn desire for them. If you get a little puppy and you give it a ball, it's going to want to play with it. This is just a trait, okay? It's a behavioral trait though because it's a way that that animal is acting. And humans have lots of behavioral traits. Dogs, cats, all sorts of different organisms are known for the way that they behave, and that comes from their traits. We also have physical traits. These are the ones that maybe we're more familiar with because it's usually what we see with our eyes. When we see somebody for the first time, boom, we notice their physical traits. A lot of the times it might be something like hair, like I have right here. We have 8 different types of hair that you might come across. It could be how tall somebody is, their eye color. It could be anything from like their handedness, are they left or right-handed? Do they have big bushy eyebrows? Do they not have eyebrows? I don't know. These are all physical traits, things that we can observe. Do they have, lots of muscles or are they skinny like Mr. Z? Again, these are all physical things that we can observe. And then the last one is a little bit more complicated, and usually you can't really observe this one unless you observe someone taking a treatment for it, but it would be the predisposition to medical conditions. So this is where things like disease come into play. Unfortunately, our parents and grandparents may have been carrying different traits that they passed on to us that make us predisposed, which is to say more likely to get different diseases. Maybe it's heart disease or cancer or Alzheimer's. There's all sorts of different diseases that can be passed on from family members. As they learn more about genetics and diabetes. For example, my dad is a type 1 diabetic, and he was afraid that maybe some of his kids would also be diabetic. It turned out in our family that didn't happen to be true, but that's just one example. So again, predisposition to medical conditions is another type of trait, but it might not always be an observable one. Each one of these three trait types, what I want you to do is make sure that you write down behavior, physical, and predisposition to medical traits in your notebook and give an example of a different type of each one of those. So behavioral, we used the dog playing fetch. I want you to think of a different example. For physical traits, we talked about a lot of them, but honestly, there's just so many physical traits. There's no way I could name them all. You can come up with a few of those examples on your own in the note sheet. And then for the predisposition to medical conditions, you could maybe think of some other ones that you may have heard of there as well. Okay. So again, take some time to do that, and when you're ready, you can move on. Okay, so what defines our traits? We all agree that we have different traits. The first thing is going to be our genes. And our genes are the set of genetic information that resides in our DNA. Yesterday we learned about how DNA is made of nucleotides, and those nucleotides each contain a different base. It's the order of those bases that give rise to our genes. A long string of bases will code for a specific type of protein, for example, that might make my hair brown. And so from there we could say that genes are DNA blueprints that give us our unique traits. But we are not just the sole we don't get our traits solely from our genes. Otherwise, identical twins would truly look identical when in fact that's not true. We also are influenced by the environment. The way we are raised, for example, might influence our behavioral traits. The food we eat might change the way our predisposition to different diseases. The amount of exercise we get could maybe we might be predisposed to heart risk and heart disease, but maybe if we work out our heart more, it can be a little bit healthier and we won't get heart disease. So our environment and the things that we do and how we interact with our environment can also affect our traits. Perfect example of this comes from the last unit. Neuroplasticity. We talked so much about this. This is a great example of how, if you spend a lot of time practicing and working at something, you can actually change the structure of your brain so that you get better at it. Okay, so the structure of your brain, the way it originally forms with no input, that's going to come from your genetics. However, if we are also adding in all this extra practice, doing these other things, we can change the structure of our brain and make our neurons to connect in different ways. And this is a great example of the environment impacting our traits. We can get smarter through neuroplasticity. Okay, so let's go back and look and see how these two different environments and DNA might impact the different types of traits we talked about. With behavior traits, we said, well, we might have a dog that's just predisposed to running up and down the stairs, but we could also, if we wanted to, train this dog to not respond to the toy at all. We could think of Jenga, for example. Is a very well trained dog. I'm sure when Jenga was a puppy, loved to chase balls. Unfortunately, or fortunately rather, he was trained to not pay attention to those toys anymore. And so he probably would have responded like this. So he doesn't get to play around as much because now he's been trained to work, and his behavior has now changed, and he doesn't have the same trait that he did when he was a puppy. Okay, we can look at a different one, physical traits. Now we're looking at not hair color or hair type or anything, but this is height. And we can see this is in populations of people in Europe, France, Germany, and the Netherlands, and how the average height in those different countries changed over time. So it's not necessarily due to their genetics changing, their DNA didn't change. What changed was actually their availability of food and nutrients and just better life qualities, which allowed their bodies to grow a little bit taller. So here we have again the environment impacting that trait of height because of the diet that they had. They were able to eat healthier, get better food, and that allowed them to grow taller. So physical traits, part of it, again, comes from your genes, part of it comes from the environment. The last one, predisposition to medical conditions. Here again, we're looking at, or this one's a little different. We're looking at people with cardiovascular disease, which is like heart disease. And then looking at, okay, so they may have had a heart attack at year 0 here. And then what is their, basically their survival rate based on how fit they are and how fit they stay. So what this is showing us is that people who were able to stay fit and do lots of exercise had a higher survival rate 15 years later than people who were not able to do any exercise. That's what this graph is showing us. So again, we have the genetics, which is kind of setting a baseline for us, but through interacting with our environment, we can change how our body responds through exercise or diet or practice, whatever it happens to be. So our traits come from both our genetics and the environment. It's a combination of the two. One of my good friends has a genetic identical twin. I'm actually going to his wedding in a few weeks here. And his identical twin, they definitely look similar, but they are different heights, they act differently, they have different physical traits, they have different behavioral traits, predisposition to medical conditions. I don't know about that one. I don't know that much about them, but they're definitely different, even though they have the same genes, same exact genes, but they act and look different. So that's a perfect example of how the environment impacts our traits. Okay, last piece today. I want you to do two things. First, you're going to find the genetic twin worksheet. And what this is just a set of different traits that you can analyze about yourself. You're just going to go down this trait sheet and you're going to place a yes or a no under each category. Then after that, you're going to talk with at least 4 people in the classroom, or how about 3 people in the classroom or in the school. And I want you to try to find 2 people from outside of the school or outside of teachers. So maybe you talk to a mental health worker or therapy staff, whoever. Or you could go home, you could talk to a family member, you could talk to a friend, whatever. Try to find 2 people from outside as well. So you're going to go through this list of traits, place a yes or no, get at least 4 different people onto that sheet, and then you'll be good to go. That's going to get pasted into the left side of your notebook. It's a left page assignment that I want you to get done. We're going to look at, we're going to do some tallying up and look at how many people had some of these different traits. And yeah, so that should be kind of fun to do. In order to access that, what I want you to do is the worksheet will be out on my table. You should be able to find it on Moodle as well. But then the traits themselves, those are posted online if you want a reference for them. For example, if you don't know what widow's peak is, or if you don't know exactly what I mean by attached versus unattached earlobes, you can go ahead and use that resource. It's a PowerPoint that is in the next set of slides here coming up in this lesson. So you can use that. And yeah, thanks for listening to me. We talked a lot. I hope you can go back and answer this question right here. What are traits and how do they relate to DNA and the environment? All right, so thanks for listening today. You all have a great time. I hope you enjoy the Find Your Genetic Twin activity.